Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of TBR. And I'm George Binns. And this evening we're going to be talking about what's going on in Boston. And to help us understand it better, we have with us Jerry Parisella, our state rep. Welcome, Jerry.
Welcome. Thanks for having me on your show.
So a lot of the action that I see in the paper is based on what's happening in Boston to the area, like they're having problems with the MBTA, and at the same time there is effort we ought to extend the MBTA out to Springfield and Worcester because they want to get access to more affordable housing. The migrants are showing up in great numbers. They're still having a problem with Mass and Cass, where you're going to put all those homeless people. And to some extent, it seems like Boston's driving the ship these days. And at the same time, the governor just found out that, the taxes aren't coming in as fast. Tax revenue isn't coming in as fast as we expected. So I guess the issue comes down to what gets cut, and especially from our perspective here in Beverly, you've got programs that you're advocating. Are any of those going to get impacted?
Yeah. So you're right. I mean, so what happens is every year they have these hearings and they try to decide how much money the state is going to bring in, and then they have to formulate the budget based on that. Unlike in the federal government, where they can spend whatever they want and rack up these deficits, in our state constitution, we have to have a balanced budget, so we can't spend more than we take in. So they had projected to be about a 4% increase in tax revenue from last year. Right now, it's only about a 0.5% increase, so we're actually still taking in more than last year, but it's just not as much as they thought. So one of the things so the governor did make some cuts. She's allowed to under the law. They call them 9C cuts. We did lose $100,000 for the Holcroft Park in Beverly. I had gotten $200,000, so that got cut in half. So that was one thing that got cut. So she cut about $300 million statewide for all these different projects and a few other things. So actually, as we're speaking now, we're going through for this budget for the next fiscal year. The governor just filed her budget. Then what happens is the House does its budget in April. The Senate will do its budget in May. And there'll always be differences. So then they got to come together, try to work things out. They call it a conference committee. And then if that gets, we'll vote on that typically June-ish or so, send it back to the governor, and then that'll be the new budget. So there's still some uncertainty about what the tax revenues are going to be. It's kind of surprising because the economy is actually in pretty good shape in Massachusetts.
When you say tax revenue, are we talking mostly about sales tax, or what else is involved?
There's a lot of things there. I mean, sales tax is a part of it. There's like short-term capital gains taxes, things like that. There's money coming in from the federal government, so we're not getting as much money as we had in the past because of that big boost during COVID and the ARPA money and things like that. So those are some of the other tax revenues that come in. Reimbursements, things like that. Even things like when the Attorney General sues somebody, that brings in money into the state, things like that. But the unemployment rate is hovering around 3%, so it's among the lowest it's ever been. So it's really kind of surprising why the tax revenues aren't quite what they are. That's something that we definitely need to look at. Sort of like what you were talking about, like with the MBTA, that's a huge issue, especially for here in Beverly. We got 4 commuter rail stops. There used to be over 2,000 people a day taking the train from Beverly into Boston because the Rockport-Newburyport lines converge into Beverly.
Downtown,
so it was convenient for folks. The commuter rail ridership is getting back. I think it's about 80% of what it used to be, but the subway is still about 60-65%, and it seems like the subway is having a lot of problems. The new general manager, I think, is trying to make some changes, and he has to shut down lines for a couple of weeks at a time. It's
they had a fiasco that they put in a new track, and the first thing they had to do was slow down the trains to walking speed.
Pretty bad.
So things are not going terribly smoothly with the MBTA, and yet I know I had an experience where I had to go into Boston to get my shoulder replaced, and it was extremely convenient to have my wife drop me off at downtown Beverly, hop a train. I get off at North Station, walk around the corner to Mass General, and it was a piece of cake.
Yeah.
Extremely convenient. And now you see the shuttle buses running back and forth from, I don't know where, I meet them on the Colin Street in the mornings as I'm heading off to the Y. So even now, the system is not fully up to operational capability, and yet everybody's pushing for, oh, we need to improve the green situation, which means more public transportation.
Yeah.
And one of the issues with having a vibrant downtown in Beverly is it would be nice to have some sort of jitney system or some sort of commuter rail or train system that was within the city so that everybody didn't have to park downtown. So there seems to be a lot of emphasis on public transportation, but it's a knot that I don't think they've unraveled yet.
Yeah, I mean, the commuter rail itself, I think, has gotten a lot better. It's about 95% on time. It's the subways that are still having a lot of problems.
Yeah.
So like you said, it is very convenient for folks, you know, even if you go into like a Bruins or a Celtics game, something like that, you know, you hop on the train and you're right there. So there are a lot more people taking the train, but still traffic is terrible because there's not as many people taking public transportation as they used to. There is a shopper shuttle that the Cape Ann Transportation Authority operates in Beverly, but it's not really widely used, and it's kind of inconsistent, the timing. There's been a lot of discussion about trying to have some more public transit within the city itself. They tried a shuttle from the train to the Cummings Center, but that wasn't widely used, so that's part of the issue is you offer the services, but then it's not used all that often. So. You know, the senior center offers transportation for seniors to medical appointments and things like that. But it would be nice, like you said, to kind of get those cars off the road, you know, and back on public transit.
Yeah, one of my favorites of all time is one time I had to fly into Love Field outside of Dallas, and it's a huge airport, and they got terminals scattered all over the place, and they had a horizontal elevator. That ran from terminal to terminal. You just stand on the platform, you push the button, and the train would come by and stop. You'd get on and go. And there was no operator, just totally automatic. And this is years ago, so it's not new technology kind of thing.
Right, they do that at Atlanta too, at Hartsfield, at the airport there too,
Yeah, so there are solutions. They're expensive. And with lots of people looking at the tax revenue saying, hey, I got this project in my town, so I guess it's a challenge to do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's 351 cities and towns, and everyone wants a piece of the pie, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we try to do our best to get what we can for Beverly, you know?
Yeah. And I guess this shelter situation is universal. Everybody's got a problem, Beverly included, with the high cost of housing, and that implies that the state is going to have to get in and make some things happen. I think here in Beverly, we've had some luck being able to divert the Briscoe to community property and Harbor Light, and converting that into, I think it's 83 or 85 senior apartments, which theoretically will free up 83 to 85 buildings, houses that can be sold to incoming people. And I haven't heard much lately about the previous governor's plan for everybody around the train station has got to develop multi-family housing. That seems to have died away, so
It's still around. There was like a 2-year period for the communities to come up with their zoning plans. Beverly submitted theirs recently. I mean, we have plenty of multifamily housing around the train stations anyway, so we meet those requirements. But there are some communities that resist, like Milton is suing.
Oh yeah, I see that in the paper.
So,
They've
but
been going at it for a while.
Yeah. So there are communities that are resisting it, but there are others. Yeah, I mean, there's a proposal to make. They call them accessory dwelling units or in-law apartments permissible in every community. So that could free up some housing as well. Maybe you have a senior who can bring somebody into their house, pay rent, and help pay their bills, or they maybe move into a smaller part of their house and rent the bigger part of the house. So that brings them income that keeps them in their house, but also provides housing. It doesn't cost really anything. So that's something.
The other option is part of that game is build a small unit on the property or take over a garage and convert that into an apartment.
Right.
And the seniors move into that and rent the big house.
Exactly. And that would be permissible under this new housing bill.
So there's a lot of options that makes a lot of sense for me. And yet we still have the same problem of, well, not in my backyard you're going to do that. It's going to change the neighborhood. And the issue keeps coming up of, well, it's going to bring more traffic into the neighborhood. And one of the problems Beverly is struggling with right now is what are we going to do about Folly Hill? And it keeps coming down to a traffic situation of what are we going to do with all these extra cars coming and going? They don't want to go in through the neighborhood. So transportation has got a lot of wrinkles to it that are very difficult to iron out, that I see.
Yeah, you definitely have a lot of folks when there's proposals for like affordable housing developments, a lot of opposition. Some of the communities around us, like Wenham and Hamilton, have been fighting tooth and nail. I think Beverly is a little more welcoming to it, but it still is kind of tough. Like you said, the conversion of Briscoe, also up the street in Tozier Road, there's the Anchor Point housing project, which will be about 77 units. They're not really surrounded by neighborhoods so much, so it was probably a little bit easier sell. But sometimes, just the Beverly Housing Authority wanted to build like a 4-unit in the neighborhood, and there was a lot of opposition. It was only 4 units, so it can be tough.
Yeah, but I think part of the issue comes down to, I think there's too much history of things like Cabrini and in Chicago and Ego Pruitt, where they actually had a large affordable housing complex that they had to tear down. And Columbia Point ran into some problems too. So this is, I think, one of the situations where when the government gets fully involved in it, maintenance is not kept up. And security is not maintained. So to some extent, it's got to be a situation where private industry, private developer has to take on these challenges. And yet when I've talked to a couple of contractors, I don't want to build any 40B projects. There's too many problems with it. There's no profit in it. So again, there's this balance of, we would like to have housing so that, my favorite phrase is, everybody that works in Beverly should be able to afford to live here. But at the same time, neighborhoods have to develop some sort of accommodation that, like you mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of multifamily housing around the train stations so we can meet the requirement. But there is obviously more opportunity there to take some of this property over and develop even more units in the area. And don't know how we'd get a private developer to take on one of these challenges.
I think that's why a lot of these community development organizations, the nonprofits like you mentioned, like Harbor Light or North Shore CDC, get involved, and they get tax credits from the state. So what happens is, so like with, let's say for example, the Briscoe project, they'll get a certain tax credit to build that housing, and what they do is they sell that tax credit to an investor. So instead of like a $5 million tax credit over time, they may get like $4.7 million up front, and the investor gets the tax credit, but that gives them the capital to do the project.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, somewhat becoming more of the model. There are, like in Beverly, if you do a multifamily housing, 12% of the units are supposed to be affordable. So that's one way. You still get the developer doing commercial rate housing, but also they have a certain portion of it that has to be affordable. So that's another way to tackle it.
Yeah. One of the gentlemen that used to work here, Matt Greenberg, made a comment one time what Beverly ought to do is build a 100-story building, and the first few floors would be affordable, and as you move up to the higher levels, you're paying more for the apartments, and you can have all the combinations you want, from a low-rent district to super spectacular in one building. And you think you're laughing about it, yeah, but Chicago, it used to be the Sears Tower, and now it's, I forget who owns the tower now, but it was a similar operation. And about 50 floors up, they had a grocery store, supermarket, because it was a mixed-use building.
Yeah.
But that would go over like a concrete zeppelin, look like 100 stories high.
I know, because we did.
Cast a shadow all over the place.
Right, because they did change the zoning on Rantoul Street to 70 feet, and some of those apartments were built, and now some people are upset about that, so they're looking to rescind that.
Yeah, they're cutting it back to 50 feet.
Yeah.
4.5 stories,
Right.
So that's part of the issue of, I keep asking various city officials, what's the character of Beverly? And some people say, well, it's all clapboard. And some other people have obviously different opinions of single-family houses on fairly large lots. And depending on where you are in town, you can see all of these combinations. So to some extent, we're already a mixed-use, mixed zone type of city. And and again, I guess, how do you get the state involved in moderating that or encouraging more for housing that is affordable? And I went through this with one of the gentlemen from Harbor Light one time. Affordable housing is not terribly affordable for a lot of people. And he was telling me after the show that he and his wife decided they didn't want to live in the condo downtown anymore, and they wanted to buy a house and start a family. Okay. He had to move all the way to Lowell to get a house he could afford, and he had a fairly good job.
Yeah.
So it looks good on my tax records that my house has appreciated a hell of a lot from when I bought it, but at the same time, try to sell it, it gets to be a bit of a challenge.
Yeah. Well, the problem is trying to buy another place around here.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
So you may get a good price for your house, but then you got to buy something, and that's very difficult.
Yeah, I was just looking at Zillow this morning, and there's a small house in the Farms area that's going for almost $1 million, and it's only 2 bedrooms, 2 baths. You know, okay, it's a nice area and all that, but
it's incredible.
Geez. Yeah.
Who would have thought? You know.
Yeah. And so, again, this is a little nasty problem that it's real. I've had one guest on the show who was telling me that the people that work for him downtown in the service industry, they live up on the border with New Hampshire, and they're commuting in every day. And I've had teachers, ex-teachers, who've said that when they first got their degree and they got a job teaching and locally, they couldn't afford an apartment. They had to get a roommate so that the two of them could afford an apartment. And the problem persists. So there is a real need, and I'm not sure what the situation is with a lot of the municipal workers,
Yeah.
besides the teachers.
The governor filed a $4 billion housing bond bill, so that is being discussed right now as we speak.
What is
They
that gonna
just
do?
had a hearing on that. So it would be do a number of things. Part of it is what I just talked about, allowing those accessory dwelling units, those in-law apartments, and then some of that money would go to continue those tax credits that I talked about for like the nonprofit agencies. Some of it is doing an inventory of all state-owned property, and then maybe you can take some of that property that's not being utilized by the state and incentivize builders to build there. She talked about closing the prison in Concord, and so that's a pretty good chunk of land there, building housing there. So a lot of it would be, so it's a bond bill, so they borrow money and then they can lend it out to different organizations to build housing. So that's one of the proposals that's out there. And another part of that too is, and we sort of forget about what we already have in our inventory, like the Beverly Housing Authority has a number of units, but some of those are old, those were built in the 50s or after World War II. So a good chunk of that money would be to revitalize the current stock that we have. You walk into some of these apartments and you think you're walking into 1955, so to upgrade and modernize those as well.
Yeah, that I noticed there's a lot of them around. There's one unit, a group of units, I guess, just down the street from the hospital, almost to the high school, single story. There's another one over on Essex Street.
Yeah, Cedar Street, Essex Street.
Yeah. So one of the possibilities would be to convert those to multi-story kinds of facilities, so that, because that's the fundamental problem. There's only so much land, and what's the best way to maximize the use of the land? And it means you got to go up. It's the only way out of it. And you look at some of these European cities, and very common throughout the entire city is 4/1s or 5/1s, where you have a 4 or 5 story or a 6-story building with some sort of commercial operation on the first floor, which is a lot of what was happening on Rantoul Street. And there's a lot of pushback on that area, and I think that was some of the demise of this operation that was going to put a 5-story building on Cabot Street. This not in my neighborhood kind of thing. So has to be an attitude adjustment or an appreciation of the fact that some of the American dream is going to have to be modified.
Yeah, it's a challenge, getting folks to buy into it.
Yeah, and again, I keep coming back to the Cabrini Greens and the Igor Pruitts, that the more the government gets involved in it, the responsibility for maintaining it leads to deterioration, and there's, I think, a valid reason for not really comfortable doing that in my neighborhood.
Yeah,
and
I think that's why it seems to be shifting more to private entities doing the building and maintaining, but with support from the government to make it happen.
Yeah, that's the beauty, I think, of the Briscoe conversion, that Harbor Light and was it Beacon from Boston, that are the managers of it, and they've got an investment in it, and therefore they have, I think, a little more of a motivation than the municipalities have to maintain that investment.
Right.
So I think that's working out very well, kind of thing.
Yeah, they do good work. You tour some of the properties that they've already built, and they're really quality housing.
Yeah, I got to give Andrew DeFrenza credit, because I think he is the driving force behind them, and like you say, they're doing good work, and they're successful at it, which that's the amazing part of it.
Right.
Very tenacious of it. I've been following some of his projects that go on for years before he gets something to happen, but they stick with it and make it happen.
They
So-
have to have a lot of patience because it's
Oh,
not.
geez,
It's not.
yeah.
I mean, that's something that I've tried to talk to folks about, is trying to see if we can speed up the whole zoning and approval process. You know, the local folks should have their say and have a review, but sometimes I used to work for the city of Salem before I was state rep in their legal office, and I remember like one project, it took about 12 years, you know, it was like
Yeah.
crazy. So, I mean, it can take a long time.
Well, yeah,
for
we're
these to
going
get
through that
approved.
right now with the Bass River overlay. It keeps popping up, and it's been popping up for 10 years, and nothing's happened.
Yeah.
And there's always a reason to, well, we need to put this off until something else gets resolved. And this gets back to one of my other pet peeves, that there are too many entities around that have veto power over projects. And you think about the situation in Pennsylvania when truck caught fire and took out a bridge on, I think it was I-95. And the governor stepped in and said, we got to fix that. And he made it happen. And I just don't see that kind of dedication. And locally, it says, again, back to our favorite Hall Whitaker Bridge in the Kernwood, that somebody stepped in and says, hey, make it happen. Yeah, we got fish going upstream to spawn. Well, they're going to have a quiet season. And boatyard, well, you're going to have to truck your boats around for a while until we get this thing fixed. But 13 years,
Yeah. It's
the same problem you just mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so frustrating. We're trying.
Yeah.
We're constantly meeting with Department of Transportation folks. We got Congressman Moulton's office involved, Senator Warren, Senator Markey, because unfortunately there's permitting from the federal government that has to go through the
Yeah.
Coast Guard, the Army Corps of Engineers, and it's not a big bridge. I just
No.
don't understand why they're saying it takes this long. It's very frustrating. So that's one thing that we had the Department of Transportation look at, is buying out the yacht club and
Yeah.
seeing if that might resolve the issue of whether or not we have to have a bridge that opens or not, or we can just do a fixed span bridge, because a fixed span bridge will be much quicker.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that decision's been made yet, but they're looking at it. They have to do appraisals and things like that.
Who would pay for that?
So it would be the state taking it by eminent domain, but I think it'd be a heck of a lot cheaper than having to build two bridges, because
Yeah.
they want to do a temporary bridge and then do a permanent bridge.
Yeah.
So,
Would the state pay for it, or would
yeah,
these?
no, the state.
It won't come off Beverly's taxes.
No, because it's a state project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've successfully worked our way through a half an hour.
Yeah,
And
great.
thank you very much. Appreciate your thoughts on lots of issues.
Yeah, well, thanks. Good to be here.
And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for staying with us tonight. And if you have some issues or some comments at the end of the credits, is my email address. Send me your thoughts, and if you want to participate, I can make room for you here at the table. And we'll see you next time.